Okay, this is our last chapter, chapter 16, sports in the future. How are we going to now take everything that we learned, over these last 6 weeks and use it in your future, okay? Whether that's just your future at Wartburg or your future, career path. My chapter 16 video that I originally filmed back in May, for whatever reason, is not working. So I'm filming this a lot later in our 6-week course, and I just first want to say you guys have been an outstanding class. You've been so interesting to read your thoughts and how you're processing the information. I really appreciate it, all of your hard work. You've made my job very easy and enjoyable this summer, so thank you very much. So let's go ahead head to the first slide. Thinking about the future, okay, so here are some possibilities when you think about the future of sports. Sports are social constructions. They can be invented, redefined, and changed. So sports are evolving at all times, and that's what makes them so exciting. The meaning, the purpose, how they're organized, sports in the future will be based on a collective decision, from us as human beings. What's going to be best for us? What are our needs? Sports are, contested activities when people struggle over those decisions. So, that's where you see conflict in sports. Go ahead to the next slide. Models for thinking about sports in the future. So power and performance sports. Obviously, we've talked a lot about that. You know what that, looks like. But, will be dominant in the immediate future because they reaffirm dominant ideology. Power and performance sports are going nowhere, and that's obvious. If anything, they're only getting larger and greater. Corporate sponsors give priority to these sports because they reaffirm their interest as well. They are exclusive and create more spectators than participants, which that's always tends to be a positive. And their popularity depends on the power, staying in control of men who value the conquest over others. So if you start to see that shift, then maybe the popularity may change. Questions that people will raise about power and performance sports as we get, moving along. How should technology be regulated in exploring human limits? So we're really going to have to understand the technological advances that we're making and what's going to be legal, what's going to be illegal. How can fairness be guaranteed when there's unequal access to training and technology? And you can even think about that at Division III when you talk about facilities. How are we going to guarantee fairness if certain teams have certain things? One thing we didn't touch on is in soccer, for example, they've just now made it legal to wear heart rate monitors. And that would really be something that would be incredibly useful for us coaches if we could monitor our heart rate of our players. However, it's incredibly expensive to get the software and buy everyone a heart rate monitor. But if a team can get it, what advantages do they have, and is that really fair? How can injuries be minimized and access maximized when the goal is conquest? Okay. Next slide. Models for thinking in the future, part 2, the pleasure and participation sports. Again, you remember what those are. We've talked a lot about them, over the last 6 weeks. Will grow as connections are valued over, confrontation and domination. Corporate sponsors may support these sports more in the future as people, essentially show more interest in them. Other factors support the growth of these sports. Concerns over health and fitness, so people that just want to be active and stay healthy for longer periods of their life than just when they're young. Participation preferences of older people, values and experiences that people bring to the sports, groups seeking alternative sports and new ways to do sports. Go ahead to the next slide. College clubs offer sports that combine elements of performance and pleasure, or performance and power and performance and pleasure and participation. They have a picture of ultimate frisbee here, and that's a good example. Obviously, here at Wartburg, we have rugby is a club sport. We may have a few other sports. Lacrosse there for a little while was a club, and now it's a real sport here. Obviously, the bigger schools have a lot of club sports. Primarily Wartburg has the intramural sports that give access to people, which might not be quite the same as what they're talking about here, but is also an example. Go ahead to the next slide. Current trends in sports. Okay, factors supporting the growth of power and performance sports. People with power and influence use them to reaffirm ideologies. We talked about this. They are easy to market and sell. They're easy to sell for us. They're exciting, and we buy in, and we want to watch what, athletes can do, and the media tells their story. So it goes back to what we talked about in earlier chapters. It's in our face. That's what we see day in and day out, and we don't think anything of it. Go ahead to the next slide. Current trends continuing, factors supporting pleasure and participation, concerns about health and fitness. We already talked about that. Preferences among older people. I mentioned that earlier. At Wartburg, if you hadn't noticed, they put in pickleball courts in the center court gym there in the W. And pickleball is huge among older people. Huge. It's something that they all get into. I mean, you can also talk about like golf and tennis, but so sports like that, that older people are really buying into. Current values and experiences of girls and women. Groups seeking alternatives to power and performance sports. Go to the next slide. So there's a picture here of, essentially like a race about to start, a distance race of some type. Concerns about health and fitness may encourage sports that have wellness values. So you're going to see more people running the marathons, half marathons, the 5Ks, anything that gets them physically active without having to commit to something that's really taxing. Not that running isn't taxing. I don't mean it like that at all, but it keeps them healthy and they're not in any real imminent danger to like hurt their head or such. Go out to the next slide. Some older people will emphasize traditional, pleasure and participation sports, like golf, but others will, do new alternatives, and that, they have rollerblading here. Obviously, biking is huge. I just got done telling you pickleball is a new sport, tennis. There's a lot of different sports that older people will continue to play. Women and men will play more sports together and organized in more of that pleasure and participation. Some of you might already do it in intramurals. Some of you may even do it once you start the workforce. Once you get out in the adult world, there's a lot of adult leagues, adult softball leagues, volleyball leagues, and a lot of times they're co-ed and teams intermix in those environments as well. Go ahead to the next slide. Women's roller derby is an emerging new sport. If you didn't know, Waterloo has a roller derby team. And they're, very popular locally, so that's another sport that's really growing as well. Go ahead to the next slide. Those who favor, unstructured activities will seek alternatives, just extreme sports, like getting outside, hiking. Hiking's a huge activity that a lot of people get into. Whitewater rafting's here, canoeing, kayaking, any of those, again, are a little bit alternative to what we would constitute as a normal sport. Remember, we can't always define what sport is, but, doing different activities like that. Go ahead to the next slide. Those who favor unstructured activities will seek alternatives. So it's people who don't want that environment of an authority figure telling them exactly what to do or that there's necessarily rules to follow. Will find different sports to do as well. Go to the next slide. Many alternative sports are not extreme. They involve competition. They're showing here frisbee golf. If you've never played, it's a lot of fun. There's obviously lawn games that people play as well. It's not as physically active as something like frisbee golf. There's now soccer golf. If you haven't seen that, it's literally on a golf course. They make a larger hole and you're kicking the ball just like you do with a golf ball, except for with your leg. So that's another sport that I think you're going to see grow over time. Go ahead to the next slide. Many pleasure and participation sports offer health benefits, as well as connections with others. Go ahead to the next slide. So other alternatives, and this list, is quite long, but, there's the Broom Huck Jam ticket, to ride, the Paralympics, Special Olympics, the Gay Games, the Senior Games, the Muslim Women's Games, and adventure sports. So there's all these other activities that are going on that draws people in to be active and to participate in sports. So go ahead to the next slide. People with disabilities also seek connections through sports with people within their environment. And you see this a lot where, you have tag teams, people in wheelchairs still participating in races and doing these things, but pairing up with somebody else. Go ahead to the next slide. The Gay Games have emphasized on inclusion, so people are included. They want to just make an environment that gay athletes feel safe to participate in, and they really want to create an environment where everybody can participate if they choose. Go ahead to the next slide. Factors that are influencing the trends today. Okay, go ahead and get them all up. Organization and rationalization. Okay, do it the right way. Commercialization and consumption. You are what you buy and wear. Telecommunications and electronic media are, really obviously influences us. Leave my video games and go outside, the kind of this idea of like, no way, I don't want to do that. Just simply putting your phone down and not going near that can be difficult. Technology enhancing, is now, what is considered normal, and demographic changes, and just understanding, the cultural influences that everybody is experiencing. Go ahead to the next slide. Cultural trends, sports for people with disabilities, okay? So increasing people disabled by war, lack of medical care, and poverty. There's increasing recognition that people with disabilities do desire to play sports and have the right to have these opportunities. There is a mother that I know very well. She has 2 young sons that have some major disabilities that they're going to face the rest of their lives. And she was commenting to me how there's no activities within the Cedar Valley area that they can be involved in. And that how disappointed she is, how she wants to get them immersed, and she wants them to be, hanging out with other children just like most parents do, and learning and growing, and there's just not those opportunities. Continuing the use of sports participation as therapy, and they're finding that this could be a good outlet for them to learn social skills, to work on some of the things that they're not as good at, and put them in those situations. More sports for elite athletes with disabilities as well. It continues on here. So there's new technologies that facilitate sport participation, more visible examples. There's more, just being able to see it a lot more than ever before. And emergent ideas with vocabularies and orientations support people with disabilities and their participation in sports. Go ahead to the next slide. So, here's a picture. It's a great picture. Accessible playing surfaces, sports facility to make it possible for people to play sports and encouraging conditions. Wartburg obviously does Special Olympics in February, and if you're ever around to participate in it, it's a fantastic event. It truly is, and I always recommend students participating when they can. Go ahead to the next slide. Will video sport games and virtual sports replace the on games among some children? This cartoon here says, "Oh mom, I'm not going to outside to play when I can play the virtual World Cup right here." And that's that balance parents have to worry about. You may have to worry about that someday. How much computer time, how much, they're calling it now, screen time, are your kids getting, and making sure that they're getting outside and playing. One thing that has been, I'm a mom, I've told you guys that, I have a 3-year-old, so I see all these articles, and one thing they're talking about now, it kind of relates to what we're discussing, is that parents do all these things called play dates. And if you've never heard of a play date, essentially it's adults that organize time for children to play together. And they do that to create a safe environment. Instead of kids just roaming about and trying to find people, we'll create it and we'll make sure that we're there and we're watching it. Well, they're actually saying that's one of the worst things that parents can do, because you're taking away your children's ability to make friends on their own and develop relationships and become creative. You're the one structuring everything. So it'll be interesting to see, where this direction goes. You want children to be able to free think and learn on their own and get active, but we also live in a society that doesn't always allow that. Go ahead to the next slide. So now think about, we're going to go through a lot of different things about becoming an agent of change. We've talked about so many issues throughout these last 6 weeks in regards to so many different topics. And yes, it's all focused on sports, but I'm hoping that you could take little chunks away that you could use for your future. I really want to know how you plan to be an agent for change. What are some steps that you can do, whether it's right now, okay, here at Wartburg, or whether it's going to be after you start, your field of work in the future. What things are you going to do to start to really, educate and change the thought process behind some of these old ways. So the first one is, conservative goal, which is growth, based on the belief that sports should expand and become more efficient in their current form. Emphasizes management issues and performance, improving performance. Becoming change agents, identifying goals. The reformist goal is improvement, based on the belief that sports are positive and participation opportunities should increase. Okay, emphasizes social inclusion, equality, and fairness. The third one here, if you go to the next slide, is this radical goal, transformation. So based on the belief that dominant sports are, very flawed and must be reorganized and replaced. Emphasize a critical approach within structure and ideological changes. Think to yourself, which one of those do you kind of start to identify yourself with? Do you think sports are really in a bad place and they really need to change? Do you think they're in a good place and, we just need to get more people to participate? Do you think they need to grow? Just start to kind of think about what your opinion is after all of this information this last 6 weeks. So vantage points for making change. Okay, go ahead and get them all up. There's 4 different ones on this slide. Work within the system of sports. Be an insider and try to avoid being a co-op, okay? So that's where I kind of see myself, a female head coach. I'm trying to work within the system. I'm an insider, and it's difficult, especially in my field of women's soccer, to kind of infiltrate. It's a really male-dominant area. And in the coaching world, I'm considered young. That's another kind of, tack against me. And I'm a mom, and that in itself brings on a whole, it's another set of stereotypes in regards to who I am as a person, the type of coach I am, and the commitments that I can make. Join, opposite groups, create and join groups that use political pressure to create, just change, okay? Create new and alternative sports. And then work outside of sports. Work to transform, cultural practice and form social relationships that affect the meaning and organization of sports. Go ahead to the next slide. So viewing sports as a social constructions may cause some people to be defensive because they resist the idea that we can or ever should change sports. So understand, you could have a simple conversation with someone moving forward and say, I took this class and, we talked about this, and people will be resistant to it. They'll say, no, that's not the case at all. I still talk to so many individuals that have no idea, some of the areas that we're still lacking in, not only gender, but racially, social class. There's so many things out there I think people are naive to or just don't understand. Go ahead to the next slide. So this is a funny slide I put in here, Quidditch. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It was created at Middlebury College. It's a Division III school out east. You guys are all Harry Potter, generation. I did not grow up with Harry Potter. I was in college when it came out. I'm always very honest. Don't gasp. I have not read the books. I have not seen the movies. However, I do know enough about Quidditch to know that it came from Harry Potter. The former school that I was at, Denison, I'll never forget, I came outside one day to go out to practice, and I saw all these people on brooms, and there was hula hoops, and they were running around chasing each other on the brooms, and I had no idea what was going on. Well, obviously it's Quidditch, and it's a game. It's become very popular. I know some people, whether it was this year or last, try to start it here at Warburg as well. Go ahead to the next slide. Tough Mudders, some of you might have participated or know people have participated in. These were created by students at Harvard business class. These are kind of extreme runs. You have to do all these crazy things along the run. They're showing here you got to walk across mud. I've heard of people you have to crawl under electric wiring, and if you touch it, it kind of zaps you. And there's all these different things. They're quite dangerous. I've known probably a good handful of people who have done them. And some others, just along the way, and there's a lot of broken bones, and you get stitches and stuff, but people love them, and, that's something that a lot of people have been doing as well. Go ahead to the next slide. Regardless of the vantage point, being an effective agent of change requires these three things, okay? So regardless of where you are in your life, regardless of what field you're going to do, here are 3 things that you need to have. Vision of what sports and social life could and should be like. Okay, so you can't just sit and get stuck in one thing. You have to be able to visualize what sports could be like. What could they be like? And, what should they be like? How much should they be affecting our society, affecting our education, affecting our family life? Willingness to work hard on strategies needed to turn visions into reality. You can't just make change overnight, so you have to be committed and willing, to really look at different ways that we can make it better. Political abilities to rally the resources to make effective change. And, that's just going to be getting the right people on your side and getting the support that you need. athletes as agent of change. Okay, so the book, really talks about kind of the big dog athlete. Athletes have, the celebrity power and marketing status, but they really have little power to change or transform sports and society. I don't necessarily think that's the complete case, but I do think in certain sports, athletes don't have much of a say. If athletes endorse deep change in society, they risk losing support and their media coverage. To become agents of change, athletes require the support of established organizations that can provide them with the cover. Go ahead to the next slide. This last slide here is professional teams often have programs that serve local populations. This one serves a low-income minority groups in Indianapolis. Is this a good place, to become an agent of change? And, it's just a question for you to think about. So, like I said, this is our last chapter. I know that the chapter 16 in itself really talks about how to become an agent of change. I want you to really start to think about all the things that we talked about. What is one topic that really kind of sunk into you that you would like to see continue to change or formulate? Or, what is one area that you were like, wow, I really had no idea this was going on or still going on or this was happening to certain individuals. Thanks again for all of your hard work these last 6 weeks. It's been fantastic. Have a great rest of your summer.